Penelope will not weave. The shroud of her father-in-law, the last duty owed to her departed husband, Odysseus's lineage, she will not finish. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope tells the suitors who vie for her hand and exploit her estate's hospitality that she will choose one of them when she finishes her weaving. But all she weaves in public, she unweaves in private, for she will have none of them. In this video, I'm going to look at heroines, female heroes, where Penelope's weaving and unweaving, her delaying the task of weaving, we might say, not rejecting it, but delaying it, so that she may resist the suitors and eventually receive him back, is a sort of paradigm for the two functions of the feminine as I am going to describe it. The epic feminine, denial of the unworthy, and devotion to the worthy male. Penelope's suspicion that Odysseus may return one day, she doesn't have any certainty, is a sign of loyalty, and her testing of the actual Odysseus in disguise when he does appear bespeaks this gatekeeping role of femininity as well. She resists him even as she did the suitors, only in his case, he is the true patriarch of his manor, and so she comes to recognize him. Resistance against the unworthy, recognition of the worthy, denial, devotion. Framing female heroism in this way, of course, contrasts with the girl boss figure that's been so ubiquitous in recent media. In a sense, this is a follow-up on my corruption of the feminine video, as a few people in the comments there asked for an exploration of the non-corrupt and heroic feminine. Weaving this shroud, apart from a vestige of her now former life as Odysseus's wife, is a symbol of feminine creation. Homer spells this out when he describes the island of Ithaca and its nymphs, who weave purple garments there, mortal bodies under the olive tree of their patroness, Athena, goddess of wisdom. But Penelope will not weave, only for Odysseus, if he would ever return, and return he does. Her resistance against the suitors buys enough time for him to reclaim his home and wife after slaughtering the pretenders. In a sense, Penelope is the archetype of female heroism in classical Hellenic culture and presents us with a few key symbols. The feminine is usually identified with nature, the land, the realm, the home, and the masculine with political authority. Since Odysseus has left, his realm is without authority, and unworthy usurpers come to fill that void. Order can be restored if legitimate authority returns to a loyal land. Legitimacy must meet with loyalty. These would be the yang and yin of politics. In Odysseus's absence, Penelope, the heroine, resists the unworthy masculine. The many clamoring pretenders must give way to the one true lord of the house. The spiritual allegory here is that many different things vie for our attention, whereas we ought to be focused on the one needful thing. This kind of metaphor appears a lot in the Bible. This resistance, denial, shows up in modern stories all the time. Where the hero slays the beast, the heroine resists its advances. And where he undergoes a death and rebirth, she calls him back from death or back from the wilderness, motivates his return to the world and to its duties. Because Penelope isn't just denying the suitors, she also represents the reason for Odysseus's return by remaining faithful to him. The female that urges the hero on in his quest by being his prize, we would say, the eternal feminine urges us forward, per Goethe, is also in this way his guide, like Beatrice motivating Dante onto his heavenly ascent through paradise, or the Sibyl that guides Aeneas into the underworld so that through the underworld he may enter heaven and have a vision of his mission to found Roman civilization. There is something more perfect, I would argue, about stories where the guide is also the hero's beloved. Whereas in the case of Aeneas, the female priestess, the Sibyl, that leads him in his otherworldly journey is not his future bride. That would be the princess of the Latins, Lavinia. When I read the Aeneid, I always imagined Lavinia somehow astral projecting from her palace in the Latin heartland to the temple at the Greek colony of Naples to guide her future husband on. That's just my Aeneid fan fiction, my intuition. Now, Greek tradition presents us with two other Penelopes who are rejected by their Odysseus's. Loyal women who are not met with the heroes embrace in the end. One is Medea, devoted to Jason the Argonaut but cast aside, and the other is Ariadne, who is instrumental in Theseus's mission to slay the Minotaur. Ariadne gives him a golden thread that he may follow back to find his way out of the labyrinth of the Minotaur. After killing it, the thread, weaving, again is a symbol of heroic femininity. The scorned Medea becomes vengeful and commits a terrible act against Jason by killing her own children and Jason's new bride to stop him from having any progeny. She rejects the role of mother after that of wife is denied to her. But in the case of Ariadne, she does not turn vengeful, and so eventually catches the attention of a god who replaces the unworthy Theseus and takes her for his bride, Dionysus. But if we take every element of these stories to be allegorical for the human soul and its journey, we might say that Theseus is the will in man that slays his ego when the latter has grown monstrous. The Minotaur is a creature in which the head is of an animal, our wild or beastly instincts, and the body is human. It's been taken over by that animal head. But the will that slays that passionate, sinful, overgrown monster in its labyrinth, the chaotic mind is always labyrinthine, always overcomplicated, is itself transformed by that experience. The experience of defeating the beast within changes our will, because the desires of the Minotaur have been purged from us, and our will does not have to be directed at that contest anymore, at that inner fight. The male always undergoes a death and rebirth in these stories. So we might say that Dionysus is the spiritually transformed Theseus. The old Theseus had to fade away and take a new form to unite with Ariadne. So what we have here is that the slaying of the beast or animal self is often enabled by a female counterpart to the male hero. I get deeper into the allegorical reading of the story of Medea and Ariadne in the longer version of this video, by the way, which I've put up on my Substack. Let's turn to the Bible. The Bible describes Eve as a helper or complement to Adam. Ezerkenegdo, complement, counterpart, helper. Now, helper implies one that is helped, and so the feminine plays an auxiliary role to the male, but it also describes God as a helper, or rather as the source of help, as giving us help. So she is a helper, but her role is as primordial as that of the male. The helper and the helped, the one who aids the mission and the missionary himself. God made humanity in his image, according to Genesis. Man and woman he created them, which means that his image is dual, man and woman. I take that duality to be the two acts of God in Genesis, his word or command to be, and his breath, the spirit that he breathes into man to make Adam come to life. A word makes breath into a definite meaning, and breath allows a word to be heard, to be manifest. These two, the definite meaning, word, and the manifestation, breath, are the eternal male and female, meaning and manifestation. In the Greek philosophical tradition, these are called peras, limit, and apeiron, boundlessness, male and female, and you get versions of this in every tradition. Now, later on in the Bible, we find a woman who fits the title of helper very well, Rahab, who is actually an ancestor of the line of Jesus. She's a native of the city of Jericho. Jericho is actually a city in the Promised Land, but the Promised Land as occupied by idolaters. And Rahab, as representative of that land, has fallen into sin herself. She has not always resisted the unworthy men, like Penelope. In fact, she's a prostitute. She's described as a prostitute. The corruption of the land has taken its toll, but she's about to redeem herself by taking the side of Joshua, the leader of the returning exiled Israelites, whose time as slaves in Egypt has finally ended. Joshua and his people are analogous to Odysseus returning home here, and Rahab represents nature. The land, the realm, the home, Penelope, rootedness. She's been beset by unworthy suitors, but she makes the right choice. She becomes an Israelite, placing a scarlet cord on her home to mark it out as safe from the Israelites when they take the city. Now, scarlet is sometimes a symbol of prostitution, but also of life. A thread the color of blood and flesh represents the weaving of life, of bodies. which is a female prerogative. It has to do with pregnancy. We have scarlet thread in Homer's description of the nymphs at Ithaca weaving garments, and the temple veil that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is said to weave in the infancy gospel of James. It's also equivalent to Ariadne's golden thread. And indeed, the weaving of life by Rahab will be most valuable. Her bloodline gives rise generations later to Jesus, according to the Gospels, because she's an ancestor of King David, and so of the lineage that Jesus is born into, which is a fascinating part of biblical narrative. A non-Israelite woman who represents the land that the Israelites are coming back to, who has been a prostitute, becomes an ancestor of King David and a matriarch of the lineage of Jesus. Rahab is the land redeeming itself, purifying itself to receive its Lord, her Lord. On the issue of prostitution or giving into the unworthy male, the Bible presents us with several falls, several moments of demonic intercession in history, and often they target the female in particular. The first is obviously Adam and Eve's expulsion from Eden on account of listening to the serpent, but a second comes soon after in Genesis 6 when so-called sons of El, sons of God, unite with the daughters of man. Some women allow themselves to be seduced by these fallen angels who offer them all kinds of knowledge and arts and magic. There's other interpretations of that, but this is the most consistent. And I've made a video about this before. The Bible consistently presents the devil or the demonic as trying to create a marriage alliance with humanity. A fascinating offshoot of this tradition occurs in Egyptian paganism, the very tail end of it. In Roman Egypt, we have the career of one Egyptian priest called Zosimos, or Zosimos of Panopolis. He was an initiate of the Egyptian mysteries as they existed then and wrote in Greek. He was a pagan, but a monotheistic pagan and a fan of Hebrew tradition. And so in one of his writings, Zosimos reproduces an Egyptian story that he considers to be related to the Hebrew account of fallen angels uniting with human women, which you find in Genesis and in the book of Enoch. Apparently, lustful angels came to the goddess Isis at one point in Egypt. Isis, as a human priestess, was visited by these entities who offered her knowledge and magic, as in the book of Enoch, in return for giving into their lust. But she refused them, and by refusing and staying pure, she was able to gain magical knowledge all the same, but in a pure form. The specific knowledge that she seems to have gained, if we read between the lines and sort of understand this story in the wider context of myths about Isis, seems to be, I would suggest, the magic which Isis is most known for, namely her ability to bring her husband Osiris back to life, to put him back together again after his evil brother Set had cut him up into pieces. In other myths, Isis finds her husband's pieces, gathers them up, and brings her husband back to life. I won't get too graphic, but she does this by way of one piece in particular that she uses to breathe life into his body again. It represents his manhood. So in the case of Isis, to resist or rebuff unworthy men is to become the kind of woman who can make a king, Osiris, come back from the dead, metaphorically. She unlocks her wifely magic, so to speak, by resisting other than her husband, resisting unworthy suitors. And like Penelope, the nymphs of Athena as well, or Athena herself, Isis is a weaver. She weaves life. She weaves or stitches Osiris back together again, and of course, she births Horus. If man is a holy warrior, the woman is a holy weaver. Resisting the lust of others, unworthy males, demons, allows Isis to bring the worthy male, Osiris, her husband, back, and specifically by way of his virility, his masculine power, if we follow the symbolism there. The female's heroism in recalling the male occurs through desire. It's an erotic heroism, but desire in its legitimate place, not promiscuity. Again, the female hero resists and recalls, denies and is devoted to the unworthy and the worthy masculine, respectively. Athena does the same in Greek tradition. She saves the heart of Zagreus, a manifestation of Dionysus, after he gets dismembered by evil titans. By guarding his heart, which she keeps safe, he can come back to life. Zeus can bring him back to life. The essence is preserved. In the philosophical tradition, specifically in Proclus, Athena and Dionysus are the female and male forms of the world soul, lower than Zeus and Hera, but higher than earthly deities. So she is guarding her rightful male counterpart. They correspond to each other. And like Isis, she rejects unworthy or lower males. She denies Hephaestus, who wanted to woo her at one point, and so he ends up uniting with the earth instead, with nature, the feminine on his level, and spawning humans, specifically Athenians. Not getting too graphic here either, but the symbolism shows us that Athena redirects Hephaestus to the feminine that is proper to him, to his level. Sort of a lower manifestation of her, we might say, the earth. Anyway, we see in these stories that devotion to the worthy male isn't always passive, but also active. Male and female can be active or passive, depending, but they're still masculine and they're still feminine. The work of remembering the dismembered Osiris and Dionysus, literally remembering them, is an active devotion on the part of Athena and Isis. Sometimes it's an outright rescue that we find. Dismemberment is the quintessential spiritual initiation. Losing one's ordinary self, each part of us removed until only the essence remains. The male hero undergoes trial, embraces death, descends into the underworld like Aeneas or Heracles, receives transcendence, the beyond, a vision of what is beyond earthly reality, and returns to the earth, resurrects, called on by the feminine who guards his place in the realm of life, who does not give in to pretenders. He penetrates nature again, brings his insight from the beyond, from death, but also discovers it in the earth, even as we are made of two seeds, the genetic material from both a father and a mother. That's the mystery of nature. So he returns with knowledge from the beyond, but he also discovers that knowledge already in the here and now. Now, the rescuing or recalling function of the female occurs in the widespread figure of the heavenly maiden, say the Valkyrie of the Norse. The Valkyrie rides down to catch a noble soul fallen in battle and raise it to a higher plane. And you have certain equivalences in the Apsaras of Indian tradition, the Houris or heavenly wives of Islam. The Valkyrie's military raid, so to speak, is one of rescue, of healing. Valkyrie military expedition is also essentially feminine in that it may be carried out on behalf of life, specifically of motherhood. We have the story of Frigg, the wife of Odin, hearing the plea of a king and a queen who could not conceive children, and sending down a Valkyrie to bring them a sacred fruit which, once consumed, renders them fertile, and so they're able to produce an heir. On the issue of women adopting armor and fighting as men, not as the above, but actually taking on the male role of soldier, this is pretty widespread from Mulan in China, right? And there's stories in European tradition as well. And in The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien gives us an example of this in the character of Éowyn, but she ultimately renounces war for the sake of life. Quote, "I stand in Minas Anor, the tower of the sun," she said. So in a sense, here we have the masculine symbolism of tower, of the solar, that she's making peace with. "And behold, the shadow has departed. I will be a shield maiden no longer, nor vie with the great riders, nor take joy only in the songs of slaying. I will be a healer, and love all things that grow and are not barren." End quote. A healer and love all things that are not barren. That's key. Her husband, future husband, also renounces war, but in particular, her renunciation has a lot to do with the feminine, the functions of healing and of growing and of not being barren, of life, of embracing motherhood. We should also note that sometimes the female hero is resisting a corrupted femininity that preys on her on account of its jealousy for her youth, for example, as in Snow White. And she may be rescuing not the hero, not the male, but a fellow female that has fallen into corruption. That can happen too. So, for example, Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market gives us an example of that, and it really is one of the best examples of modern fairy tales. Two sisters live alone, apart from other persons, apart from the wider community of humans, and they seem to be orphaned and isolated, so therefore vulnerable. And sure enough, to exploit that vulnerability, one day a fruit market comes around run by a troop of goblins. They call out and lure the girls with their wares, and then, since these outcasts don't have any money, they offer to sell them fruit not for money, but for other more intimate items. A lock of hair, a single tear, and so on. They are, in a subtle way and by degrees, proposing de facto prostitution. The fruits represent lust and promiscuity. That's pretty clear from how they're described. And eventually one of the sisters accepts and partakes in the many fruits of the Goblin Market, whereafter, as a consequence of this, she is left used up and listless and desensitized to life. She loses her vitality. Her sister, distraught, tends to her, takes care of her, until the market comes back around one day, and she goes out to meet it, but refuses the goblins' offers, refuses their fruit. They eventually grow angry and attack her and try to force their fruit on her, but she resists all the same. And it's in refusing that eventually she's able to gain the antidote, medicinal fruit, which she then takes back to her sister. Quote from the very end of the poem, "Days, weeks, months, years afterwards, when both were wives with children of their own, Laura would call the little ones," Laura is the sister that first took the fruit and was left drained by it, "and tell them of her early prime, would talk about the haunted glen, the wicked quaint fruit merchant men, would tell them how her sister stood in deadly peril to do her good, and win the fiery antidote. Then joining hands to little hands, would bid them cling together, for there is no friend like a sister, in calm or stormy weather, to cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands." End quote. So here, resistance against the unworthy masculine leads eventually to worthy marriage for both sisters, but the rescue is one of sister to sister, of female friendship directed at virtue. Okay. Speaking of redeemed female characters, we talked about Rahab in the Old Testament as a redeemed prostitute, the symbol of the undevoted female who goes off with the unworthy men, like a Penelope who betrays her duty to Odysseus. Actually comes up a lot in the Bible. Jerusalem is sometimes described as a prostitute. The people of Israel are described as unfaithful to God in Jeremiah's laments, for example. But then in John's Apocalypse, this symbol for nature, for the land, the realm, the people, humanity betraying God is the whore of Babylon. And we are told that Jerusalem is like Egypt, like Sodom. So it's being compared to these old nations. Once Babylon falls, together with the demonic male beast, we get the image of the true feminine, the new city or church, which is described as the wife of the Lamb. So Christ is married biblically. That's important to keep in mind. He has a wife. It's this new city, this church, a female entity. Now she is described as coming with the Spirit. It's often the Spirit and the bride. So she is a manifestation of God's breath, we could say, as we saw before, which is feminine. He is the Word, Logos, the Word, and she is the breath, Spirit. And her job is to dispense the water of life. Babylon's cup joins the blood of the saints in a chaotic unity. Babylon fornicates with the kings of the earth, promiscuity leading to uniformity, but the water of life goes to the nations which are now healed. Harmony between different distinct nations, not global uniformity, is what's being described here. And in fact, the sacred feminine is often multiplicity. Frigg, the wife of Odin, has 12 maids, which are sometimes thought of as her manifestations. Radha, the wife of Krishna in Indian tradition, has sometimes been described as manifesting in the many gopis, the many female devotees of Krishna. You also have the chorus of the Song of Songs, the Gospel's parable of the bridesmaids, etc. Because she represents humanity. The church is a manifold, a harmony, and she corresponds to his wholeness, harmony and wholeness, community and coherence, the people and power, the land and the Lord. The wife of the Lamb bears the water of life, just as the Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 8 is linked to libation, anointing, and so on. We have an ancient Greek grail maiden as well, Hebe, the cup bearer to the gods and wife of Heracles. Heracles possesses the multiplicity of nature, the 50 daughters of Thespius, or analogous to the daughters of Atlas, the Hesperides, from whom he gains the fruit of immortality, and he marries a representative of sacred femininity, Hebe, the bearer of the cup as womb, and the water of life or holy wine as energy, the enlivening of nature. The symbol is the same as that of the Grail Maiden, the sister of Percival in the Holy Grail story. Her name is often provided as Dindrain, and basically she guides the knights, Galahad, Bors, Percival, in their quest for the Holy Grail. She's instrumental ultimately in Galahad eventually gaining the Holy Grail, in a sense becoming the Grail King thanks to her, but unfortunately she dies on the journey. I would suggest that the Holy Grail story could be reimagined with Dindrain resurrecting to be there when Galahad receives the Grail. The ideal of virginity may have skewed the story away from what I regard as its natural end. Galahad and Dindrain both surviving and perhaps marrying, but generally speaking, what happens is that Galahad remains a virgin until the end and Dindrain dies. And the conditions of Dindrain's death, of the Grail Maiden in a sense guide's death, are particularly interesting, because she dies at the hands of a vampiric, blood-sucking woman, a kind of evil woman. It's a very similar dynamic to that of Snow White, but that deserves its own video, and I'll get into this a bit more in the long version. We're not going to get into all the details of the female guide, initiator, the initiatrix, but she is often solar, she is often luminous in character. The Sibyl who guides Aeneas is a priestess of the sun god, and Lavinia, who Aeneas finally marries, is said to be a descendant of a local sun god, Sol Indiges, and is associated with fire at various times. Her hair catches fire. Medea is, of course, a descendant of the sun god. The goddess Sol of the sun is also part of Odin's own hero journey, although he gains the meed of poetry from the giantess Gunnloth. She would be the main initiatrix, the female initiator of Odin in his story. There's others as well. Isis herself, in the text cited by Zosimus, was being approached by a lustful angel of the sun, it seems, a parody of the solar archetype. Since she refuses him but gains his knowledge in a pure form, she sets the solar archetype right, and thereby, I suggested, restores Osiris. So we may say Isis there is also a solar woman. She fits that archetype, the solar being proper alignment with the masculine. And then you have the woman who represents Israel, the church, Mary, mother of Jesus in John's Revelation, who is a woman described as dressed in the sun. The sun generally stands for deeper spiritual truths outside our immediate environment, so to speak, compared to the lesser mysteries of the moon. So the sun maiden in these cases is that which leads us to a higher truth. And there's a masculine and feminine aspect to that. As a footnote, we haven't distinguished here between mother and wife. We've just focused on wife in a sense. Heroine as equivalent to male hero, as lover of male hero. The role of the mother, like Hera, who first makes difficulty for heroes like Hercules, but then adopts them, would make for another video. That hasn't been the archetype that we've been dealing with here. We've also not addressed the Virgin Mary, but her role in the gospel, etc., would require its own separate discussion. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. As always, there's links in the description for ways to help the channel and so on. If you like this kind of content, please consider supporting it. That's a very YouTuber thing to say. And again, if you want to hear a longer version of this video in which I get into some more details and provide an allegorical reading of some of these myths and stories, you can head over there to my Substack. and subscribe and listen to that. Thanks a lot. Until next time, and Merry Christmas.